Sports for Real with Coach Hall. Last week, the NCAA season got an official kickoff. You saw Navy get demolished by Notre Dame for about the 100th time, and a couple other games took place. But we had a little bit of excitement take place last night, and I'm talking about two games in particular. First, the Florida Gators stepped way outside their comfort zone by having a rematch with Utah out in the mountains. Last year they had a great game down in Gainesville, and that heat and humidity finally got the best of Utah before they faded in the end. Well, it's a different challenge when you go out to the mountains, and you saw some of the Gators players sucking that instant oxygen, and that made a big difference for them. But you knew they weren't in Florida anymore. But I give them credit, because if you know the history of Florida, they usually start out with two games that they're supposed to win to get all the kinks out before taking on their first SEC opponent like, say, Tennessee. Well, every now and then they will step out and they'll take a two-game series, and they don't usually go this far, but if they would take on an opponent like a Miami and Michigan when they opened up in Dallas a few years ago, if they lose, you can't expect to see the Gators playing those games for another 4 or 5 years. Such is the case with this Utah matchup. Now that they have lost, they're still staring down the schedule of the SEC. And I think it's their own fault. If they had been stepping out playing games like this all along, they'd be better prepared for what's coming. And by that, I mean the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. So instead of them being able to control who they play every 4 or 5 years, now they're probably going to have to play one of those two teams every year. But that's in the future. Last night, the atmosphere is what I really want to talk about. And the atmosphere with the Gators and Utah, it seemed kind of stiff and plastic. If you compare that to the other atmosphere where Nebraska took on Minnesota, completely different. And why I'm bringing these two games up specifically is you're looking at the past college football and you're looking at the future of college football. With all of this realignment taking place, you got teams that are going to be flying across country. Matter of fact, today, the ACC is going to reconsider a vote to decide whether or not they want to take on Cal, Stanford, and now I'm hearing SMU. Well, if you take Cal, and I've seen Cal come across the country to play Maryland for a 12 o'clock game, and that doesn't go too well. So if you're going to take all your programs and have them run across the country like that, it's going to be a lot of tired athletes, and I really don't see what the benefit is, especially when you look at a game like last night when the Gators and the Utes played. Like I say, the atmosphere was kind of plastic, and this is what you're going to get in the future when all these teams start traveling across the country to play against each other. There's no real connection there. I mean, it's okay if you play every now and then, but every year, I just don't see this setup lasting long. By contrast, the old way people used to do it, you schedule regionally, you got a reason to dislike that other opponent because they've been whipping you for so long, and they're close by, and your fans, they're going to let each other know that they whip you, so you just can't wait until the following year to get another shot. Case in point, you take Nebraska. The first time I ever saw Nebraska play Minnesota was back in the late 80s, I believe it was, when I was still in school. Nebraska, the first 10 times they touched the football, they scored a touchdown. They had 70 points by the third quarter, and this was back when they were playing in the old Metrodome. This was like in the late 80s, and Osborne was still the coach. So, Minnesota, the fans, they hadn't forgot that. And that's the advantage of having these rivalries where you play each other every year, where everybody's going to know what the history is between these teams. And it's not just some plastic environment like what you're going to get when these teams start traveling around into environments they're not familiar with. Still, I give the Gators credit, like I said before, for taking on a challenge like this because this is not something they normally do. But in the end, it's going to help them, especially with Oklahoma and Texas coming into the SEC. They're going to have to learn some new comfort zones real quick. Otherwise, it's going to be a whole lot of coaching changes coming through Gainesville. Sports for Real.